On the surface, Counter-Strike appears to be an easy game to play, but those who've played the game know that there's an almost endless amount of mechanical nuances that simply do not apply to other games. Because of that, we'll be taking a comprehensive look at every fundamental in Counter-Strike. If you're a newer player or even a more experienced player, this video will give you a proper baseline to know what and how you should be practicing to improve as fast as you can. By the end of the video, if you've learned something new, I ask that you give the video a like. If you want to help me reach my insane goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of 2026, and also stay up to date with my content, you should consider subscribing. Let's get started. To make this video as easy as possible to navigate, I've left timestamps in the description so you can easily skip to parts you want to review or to come back later and rewatch parts you may have missed. The very first category of fundamentals we'll be looking at is mechanics. This category will also be subdivided into 5 sections, which include Counter-Strafing, Crosshair Placement, Movement, Recoil Control, and Aim. And to start us off, we'll first talk about Counter-Strafing. If you're a new CS player coming from another FPS and at a loss for why you keep missing your shots, Counter-Strafing is likely the reason behind this. And even if you're a more advanced player who religiously practices aim and nothing else, while also experiencing the same thing, there's a very likely chance Counter-Strafing is also the reason why you're missing. To see if this is a legitimate issue that you have, there's a simple yet very effective drill that you can run. All you have to do is load into an offline map, and to do this, go hit play, practice, competitive, then select your favorite map while also ensuring under options that infinite ammo and warm-up are enabled. After that, find a desirable wall, then long strafe with A or D, then simply counter strafe and shoot. Where the bullets land, which should be on your crosshair, will indicate how accurate your counter strafing is. Doing that is a very simple version of this drill, and if you want more from this, or perhaps you realize this is an issue you're struggling with, you can actually enable impacts and force the game to display your real-time crosshair that actually shows your real-time accuracy. To do this, make sure the developer console is enabled by hitting escape, clicking on the cog icon in the top left, go to game, game again, and under enable developer console, make sure this is set to yes. The default key binding for the console is tilde, and once you have this open, you can type sv_cheats space 1 and then hit enter. Then weapon_debug_spread_show space 1, then of course hit enter. After that, you can go to your crosshair settings and set it to classic while also moving the slider for gap, length, and thickness all to the left. Okay, now that that's all the way, at this point you should be left with a dynamic yellow crosshair that will show you your real-time accuracy as you move, jump, stand still, and spray. And like I mentioned before, if you want to show impacts, which is something I also highly recommend, you can open up your console for one last time and type sv_show impacts space 1 and hit enter. Now at this point, you can continue running the drill that I showed you, but this time with a little more information than before. But what I also recommend is to try out every gun with these settings to truly understand their standing accuracy and moving accuracy. Like myself, some things will likely really surprise you, like how the standing accuracy with the Galil is absolutely criminal, or how running and shooting with some pistols is surprisingly accurate. Shout out Tech 9. Before we get into our next category, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video. SkinsMonkey is an automated CS2 trading site. SkinsMonkey provides an instant way to get new skins. If you encounter any issues, there's a 24/7 live chat support. To find the perfect skin, there's a filter tool and a search bar to find exactly what you're looking for. If you use my promo code RyderDie, you can start trading on SkinsMonkey and earn up to $5 for free. Trade $100 worth of skins to make the most of it. But if you'd rather buy your skins, you can use my promo code RyderDie to earn a 35% deposit bonus. Thank you, SkinsMonkey, for sponsoring this video. The next section under mechanics we'll discuss is crosshair placement, which for those that are unfamiliar with is simply keeping your crosshair as close to the enemy's head when they swing you or when you swing them. It's impossible to have high-level crosshair placement without spending hundreds, if not thousands, of hours in CS, and that's because your crosshair placement is usually dictated by the level of game sense you have. However, with that said, there are ways to spend time focusing on this skill, which will yield faster improvement other than just spamming games. There are some online services like Prac that will offer pre-fire maps, but there really isn't any reason to use any of those, or I guess any other paid service for that matter, because there are maps in the workshop that offer this same exact thing. But instead, you get to host a server and you don't have to wait for one to be available. Not to mention, it's free. Anyway, my recommendation is to grind out these maps a few times and perhaps spend more time on maps you're unfamiliar with. But the reason why I say crosshair placement and game sense go hand in hand is because you first need to know where to put your crosshair. At the start of the round, it's very easy to know likely where the enemies will be coming from, but after about a minute, things get a little bit harder to predict. Things like knowing where your teammates died, knowing where the enemy was and where they killed your teammate from, seeing and recognizing gaps in the map that could reveal what the enemy could be and where they will likely come from, are all just things that you need to be considering when it comes to where you put your crosshair. And beyond that, even if you know where to put your crosshair based on the information you have, it's an entirely different skill to know how exactly you should be holding your crosshair on the angle. Will the enemy wide swing you? Will they peek you normally? Will they expect you to be there at all and just shift walk into the angle? All these things influence exactly where you should be placing your crosshair and when. I do feel like I'm providing a disservice to you as a viewer by not showing a definitive way to improve this skill, but that's the honest to God truth of the matter. However, I will say, these are all the things you should be thinking about when you're in game. Of course, having this on your mind at times will likely result in you playing worse now, but it's not about playing good today, it's about playing better tomorrow. Let's move on and talk a bit about movement, which we've already discussed the most important movement principle being counter-strafing. However, there are countless other mechanics that are movement-based that are also very important to practice. Most of these mechanics are required to complete a map that I recommend called KZ Hub. KZ, or Creeds, was actually a modder most famously known during CS 1.6 who popularized a game mode solely based on source movement, which is something I thought I'd share because I literally just learned that while making the script. So anyway, this map will test your ability to air strafe, use ladders, and crouch jump amongst other things, which on paper seems really easy to complete, but for a new player or someone who isn't familiar with KZ can actually take quite a while to complete. The first time I started practicing this map was a little over a year ago. I couldn't even complete it in my first sitting, and at the time I was a low level 10 player. The easiest way to find this map is in the workshop. You can just search KZ Hub or also download another workshop map called CS Stats Training Map, where if you select challenges in KZ, you'll find a slightly harder version than the normal KZ Hub workshop map. But using the KZ Hub isn't the beginning and ending of practicing movement. In fact, it's barely scratching the surface on this deceptively complicated mechanic. Every map in CS is also host to at least a few skill jumps that will vary in usefulness and difficulty. There are too many skill jumps to cover them all in a timely manner for this one video, but with a bit of YouTube research, you should be able to find all of them. However, I will say, practicing them is quite easy with just a few console commands. For an example, we'll be practicing window to short on Mirage. Similar to how we practice counter-strafing, be sure to hit play, practice competitive, and load into Mirage with the option infinite warm-up enabled. At this point, we'll have to open up our console and type SV_cheats true or SV_cheats 1. Then all we have to do is place our character model in the position where we'd like to start each of the skill jumps. Now at this point, we'll open up our console again and type GET POS or get pos, which then will populate a set position in console with your exact player coordinates. Once you have your coordinates, you can highlight the text, right click, and copy selected text. Then your command line in the console, type bind, then quotations, J, then paste the text we copied earlier. Now at this point, you can move your character and then hit J to return your character to the starting position, which will save you a ton of time when practicing these movement jumps. And as a side note, you can use whatever key you'd like to reset your position. I personally just use J. Before we finish up with movement, there is just one last mechanic that I want to talk about, which is arguably the most important, and that is peeking. And to keep things simple, I'm going to cover a few ways that you can peek and when you should be doing each of them. First, we have the crouch peek, which some players will refer to as a crab walk, which is a peek you should almost never do. And the reason why you should never be doing this is because when you crab walk into an angle, your character model actually increases in size horizontally, and the enemies holding the angle will see your player model much sooner before you will see theirs, which will almost always result in you dying. Second, we have shift peeking, which I will admit has its place in game and can be viable if you genuinely don't expect an enemy to be holding the angle you're coming from and you don't want to make any noise at all or even risk making noise at all. Just know that shift walking into an angle will make the fight for an enemy that is holding the angle as easy as possible. Third, we have a standard peek where you don't hold shift or crouch, but instead just swing into an angle. This is a really healthy peek that is appropriate in almost all circumstances where you expect to see an enemy and don't need to generate a whole lot of space for your team. Fourth, we have a wide swing, which is similar to a normal peek, but instead of counter-strafing as soon as you make contact, you go a bit further, which serves two purposes. One, the space you generate by swinging wider creates an opening for your teammates to easily trade you if you die, and two, makes the fight significantly more difficult for anyone holding the angle. And lastly, our fifth way to peek is swinging whether wide or not, but instead of counter-strafing, you just crouch. What this does, and why you see many players do this, is you instantly become 100% accurate once your character crouches. This makes it faster than normal counter-strafing and also adds an element of unpredictable target movement for whoever is holding the angle. Each one of these kinds of swings serves their own purpose as you play the game. You'll discover what works best for you and when it's most ideal to do any of these peeks. However, there is something you should keep in mind when you're either holding or peeking an angle. There really isn't a name for it, but it boils down to how Counter-Strike and other games similarly are designed. That being, the perspective that you see when playing CS is actually coming from the right eye as a player. That means when you peek to the right, less of your player model is exposed before you see the enemy. The opposite is true when you peek to the left. More of your player model is exposed to whoever is holding the angle before you will actually see them. This phenomenon is only amplified the closer you are to an angle, and inversely, the further you are from an angle, the more this phenomenon is nullified. So to properly use this advantage in game, prioritize holding angles where your right eye is the first thing that clears the corner, minimizing how much your model is exposed. And if you're swinging an angle, try to be as far back as possible to widen the angle and give yourself more vision before your opponent sees your player model. Okay, I know that was long-winded, but that's it for the movement segment. Our next section is entirely about recoil control, which in my opinion is one of the most slept on skills in the game. Regardless if you're a new, intermediate, or advanced player, spending 5 to 10 minutes a day, or at least every once in a while in this workshop map called Recoil and Master will result in a far more accurate spray control. Personally, how I like to use this map is by standing here in the range, disabling the recoil guide, adding a dummy target, and then strafing and counter-strafing into a full spray and testing myself to see how many bullets out of an entire magazine I can land on a target's head. For example, I would do this with an AK, and once I get at least 20 bullets out of a 30 on the target's head, I'll move the target one step back by shooting this button here. Then after that, I'll just rinse and repeat that either with the same weapon or move on to the A1S, A4, FAMAS, or Glow. Practicing this will improve your recoil in scenarios where you need to spam through a smoke or shoot through the many surfaces that appear to have the same density as paper mache in Counter-Strike. But keep in mind, shooting all 20 or 30 bullets of your magazine at someone during a standard engagement is usually not optimal. Short 3 to 5 bullet bursts, then strafing and counter-strafing into another 3 to 5 bullet burst is ideal in most medium to long range engagements. However, I will say this, there is definitely a time and a place where spraying is going to be required, and being the kind of player that is capable of that and also transferring their spray to other moving targets will often change the results of rounds where maybe you could have gotten ran over by Tech 9s executing your sight as fast as they can, but instead now your team is trolling you because you just got 4 eco kills and are now the resident eco fragger. With that in mind, if you are already familiar with spray patterns, there's a simple way where you can incorporate spray transfers into your warm-up or training routines. Fast warm-up is a workshop map that will spawn moving targets of different elevation, which is what I use personally to practice. But you can also use another map called Aim and Reflex Training Map, which serves the same purpose, but there aren't many elevation changes. Regardless of what map you use, be sure to have the bots moving and it'll result in good practice. For our very last subcategory mechanics, and probably the most controversial, we have aim. The two ways that I always train aim specifically is by either using an in-game workshop map or a software like Kovacs or AimLabs. Both have their own pros and cons, but if you're interested in checking out a good workshop map, I recommend aim_trini_v2. I'll have it on the screen, and it's kind of a hard find, so the link to that will also be in the description of the video. But to be fair, since we're really only practicing raw aim, Kovacs and AimLabs are both excellent choices. One thing I do want to warn you about though is this dangerous narrative that plagues a lot of aspiring CS players, and that is thinking aim is the only skill they should be practicing. I made a video recently about this concept, and if you're interested in learning more about this, I encourage you to check that out. But the TLDR is, aim is significantly less important than the vast majority of players give it credit for. Sure, aim is important, and every good CS player should have confidence in their aim, but if you spend time practicing all the other mechanical skills we've discussed, including a bit of aim training, you'll improve so much faster as a player versus someone who solely spends their time outside of game trying to improve their raw aim. The next big category we have is game sense. The best way I can describe game sense is like this, and I've mentioned this before in older videos, but Counter-Strike is what is referred to as an imperfect information game. In contrast, something like chess is considered a perfect information game, where all the info you need to navigate your match is perfectly laid out in front of you. Since the opposite is true with CS, this is where the game sense thing comes into play. Game sense is your ability to gather information being given to you throughout the round and match to accurately formulate the most optimal response to whatever it is the enemy team is intending to do. To break all this down, I've divided this category into 3 subcategories, starting with audio. The main source of gathering information in CS isn't from visually seeing things, but rather from audio. Things like utility, footsteps, gunshots, or the bomb being planted or defused are all key pieces of information that are entirely audio based. Because of this, it's important that we have proper audio settings first. I keep perspective correction off and my EQ set to natural. Both of these are personal preference, however, I strongly encourage you to enable LR isolation somewhere above 0%. I keep mine at 80%, and what this does is it'll enable you to distinguish whether sound is coming from your left or right side. I played the first few months of CS without this setting enabled, but once I did, it was like I was playing a different game. My overall awareness, at least for my immediate surroundings, skyrocketed. But going back to the concept that Counter-Strike is an imperfect information game, there are 2 fundamental principles to keep in mind when it comes to audio. One being, what information does the enemy team have? And 2, what information are you willing to give up in exchange for something else? Similar to how utility, guns, map control, and economy are all resources your team can pull from to win rounds, information plays an identical role. And considering what I mentioned earlier, that being audio is the greatest source of information in CS, we have to consider whether our actions that give away information are worthy of the exchange we're proposing. A common example of this that I like to make is in a 1v1 scenario. Imagine you're playing Mirage on the CT side. The bomb gets planted default in A and you're unaware of the enemy's location. The one piece of utility you have is a flash. What a lot of newer players will do is throw the flash with little intention to actually use it, and usually the flash will serve little to no help for you whatsoever. But what it actually does is help the enemy team, and a lot. If we put ourselves in the enemy's shoes, sure, they will have some suspicion on where we'll be starting our retake from, but they're just that, suspicions. What happens when we throw any piece of utility is our location becomes revealed. This is exactly what I mean when I say, what information are you willing to give up in exchange for something else? If the utility we're throwing will win us the round or significantly increase our ability to win the round, especially in this circumstance, then of course throw it. But if it'll do nothing other than serve as a public service announcement revealing our location, then it's likely not worth it. But this is just one example. Every round of CS is different. Every situation is also different. But keep in mind the two fundamental principles I had mentioned. One, what information does the enemy team have? And two, what information are you willing to give up in exchange for something else? The next subcategory for game sense is economy. Because this isn't a beginner's guide, I won't go into too much detail on how to manage your own money and how money works in CS, but rather I'll provide you with a good framework to start reading economy more accurately. And the reason why you should get good at reading economy is because it'll dictate how you should and shouldn't be playing rounds. The first thing you need to look at is how many rounds the enemy team has lost in a row. Because the loss bonus increases from 1,400 all the way to 3,400, you'll see teams that lost 4+ rounds in a row always forcing. Usually what it looks like for Ts is forced AKs with no utility or Galils with max utility. For CTs, you'll likely encounter M4s with no head armor and no utility, or MP9s or other eco guns with max utility. But even if a team is winning several rounds in a row, you need to hover over the scoreboard and see how many members survived each round. If less than 3 members are alive on the enemy team after each of their round wins, you could potentially expect them to save even after their first loss. This is because the surviving players are emptying their pockets to drop weapons for their teammates, and those who don't receive a rifle are also likely forcing with the rest of their team. So once that team loses and receives the minimum $1,400 reward, the following round no one will have enough to buy. This concept is only amplified when playing against CTs because their loadouts generally cost more. So in summary, consider 2 things when calculating the enemy team's buy. 1, how many rounds have they lost in a row? And 2, if they're winning, how many members are surviving each round? If you want a more in-depth guide on how economy works in CS, you should check out my ultimate economy guide. Link to that will also be in the description. Moving on, let's talk about recognizing patterns and playtime. As humans, we are a species of pattern recognition. As in, the more times we see something play out a certain way, the better prepared we're going to be for the next time we see it. And this is the reason why the best way to develop better game sense is to play the game. The sheer repetition of playing a map 1,000 times gives you a better understanding of how the map is usually played and player tendencies. The only way we can fast track this process of developing better game sense is to consciously make an effort to evaluate our decisions in game and learn from each mistake we make. My biggest piece of advice is to avoid autopilot. If there isn't conscious attention towards our decision in-game or any form of evaluation to our decisions, when we're punished or when we make a play work, there won't be a significant amount of player development. How I approached this during my climb was to think about every death I had during the match, which is something I still do. Every round is an opportunity to learn, just as long as you're willing to do so. Our next category we're looking at is utility, which, like most concepts we've covered in this video, is easy to learn but incredibly difficult to master. But to make sense of it all, I've divided this category into 2 subcategories, starting with lineups. A simple way that everyone, including new players all the way to tier 1 professionals, can improve their utility usage is by simply learning new lineups. There are countless lineups on YouTube that you can find for anything that you're looking for, and there are even entire channels solely dedicated to just this. But the sheer number of lineups that you can potentially learn can be super overwhelming, especially for a newer player. My advice is either tackle one map at a time, or before the start of every match you play, try to learn a new piece of utility for that map specifically. If you're not quite sure where to start or what smokes you should be learning, my advice is to check out some pro players on Faceit. This is hands down the most effective way to stay on top of what utility you should be throwing in your games. Something to stay away from, however, is learning too much utility. What often a lot of players do is set out to learn a bunch of new smokes, then when they get into game, they either forget or miss half of what they're throwing because they're just spread too thin trying to learn too much at one time. An easy formula that works for me is to first learn the lineup by watching it, second, throw the lineup in an offline map, and then third, apply it as soon as possible in your next match. 9 times out of 10, once you get past throwing it for the first time successfully in game, it'll usually stick, or at least it does for me. Our second and last subcategory for utility is about throwing effective utility. And the best way I can break this down is to look at how you should approach using each piece of utility, starting with flashbangs. The best way to approach using flashbangs is to throw what I like to call idiot-proof flashes. As in, no matter what your teammate does, the flash you throw won't blind them. This is easier said than done and will require a bit of map knowledge and offline practice, but it's worth to help set your teammates up when taking a site. The second way I approach using flashes is to pop flash for myself. A simple right click while aiming upwards or left and right click, throw up and behind you is the easiest way to flash for yourself. For HEs, you should be throwing them with the lineup you know will result in easy damage on the enemy, or you should be throwing them towards where you know they are, not where you think they are. And lastly, you should be throwing HEs to open smokes, which is incredibly important if you're an opper or if you're playing CT. The easiest way to open a smoke is to right click it, take a step 1 or 2 back from the smoke, aim at the base of the smoke, and then right click jump throw. Smokes are probably the easiest to know when to use. Obviously, if there's an effective lineup you can throw, then you should be throwing it as long as you know how to use it. But you can also use them to firefight for your teammates. And something that a lot of players don't think about, especially in lower ranks, is on CT side, save your smokes for retakes. There isn't anything you can do to put more pressure on the Ts other than smoking the bomb. Incendiaries and Molotovs both are used effectively the same, which is usually during space contention early round. On CTs, incendiaries are usually used to stop fast plays on sites or to block space early round, but what a lot of players don't think about is just how effective Molotovs obscure vision and how much noise they actually make. This is something you'll often see in pro play when there's no other alternative to try to obscure vision or to mask sound cues during the round. Our very last category we'll be covering is mental, which will be divided into 2 subcategories, with the first category being consistency. If you're looking to be more consistent in CS, there's a few things that you should always be doing. First, you should try and play the same types of positions on CT. Figure out what kind of positions you like the most and try to learn them as much as you can in those spots. There's an endless amount of content online about how pros play certain positions, which I highly encourage for you to check out. The same is true with T-side. Figure out what kind of play style suits best for you on T-side and try to replicate a similar style to that of the pros. There are an endless amount of different ways you can approach playing T-side, all varying from different paces, which is honestly the beautiful part about CS. There are a million different ways to approach any given round, but if you want to try to be consistent, adopt your style of play and see how far it can take you. Outside of gameplay specifics, in order to be more consistent, what I've done in the past is try to not make any major changes to my setup. I rarely ever adjust my sensitivity, and I've been consistent with the resolution I play on. Not only that, but since I started playing CS, I've never changed out the mouse that I use. I would buy a new one if the old one breaks, but I always rock the Pro X Superlight. And no, this video is not sponsored by Logitech, unfortunately. But even if you did all those things, there's still gonna be bad games, because you, me, and everyone else aren't donk, or no cries, I suppose. Every day you'll encounter players that are just better and will challenge your ability to play the game, and because of that, you'll perform poorly. But it's important to not shy away from those bad games, but rather try and gather whatever it is you can from those losses. The very last category you have for mental and for the entire video is tilt. And for those that are unfamiliar with the term tilt, it's when your mental state is so compromised that you're performing uncharacteristically differently and likely far worse. From my experience, tilt can be devastating to your elo. At one point this year, I was 2,800 elo on Faceit, and in a matter of 2 weeks, I found myself back at level 9. One bad loss leading into another, and all of a sudden I was spamming games and playing an entirely different brand of Counter-Strike than what originally got me to my peak elo. From that experience, I've had to come to terms with the fact that not every game is winnable, and not everyone you get matched with will have winning as their first priority. With that in mind, there is no shame in taking breaks. I actually strongly suggest taking day breaks at a time to clear your mind and step away from CS as a whole, especially if you feel like you need it. I've also mentioned this in previous videos, and for those who know me, I care a lot about mental health. Tying your self-worth to your success or failures in a video game is a quick way to develop a toxic relationship with Counter-Strike, and even a faster way to start hating the game you initially enjoyed, and can also lead you to having undesirable thoughts about yourself. My honest to God advice is to take long and distracting breaks from CS. Handle everything else in your life and not let a video game consume you. This video is easily one of the longest videos I've ever posted, and has been in the works for quite some time. If you've watched the entire video, I want to say thank you, and even if you stuck around for only the bits and pieces that you wanted, also I want to say thank you. A quick shout out to Maestro AI for partnering with the channel. If you want to leg up in the skins trading community, you should check out their website, which is also in the description. Anyway, don't forget to leave a like in the video if you want to stay up to date with my content. Help me reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. You should subscribe. As always, thanks for watching.